Feeling sorry for yourself doesn't make you feel better, self-evidently. Believe it or not, this is the angle I've decided to go with. Hello, I'm Will Howarth, and welcome to The Archive. This time, I'm going to be talking about a piece I wrote for Orchestra in 2015 called Fashionable Disease. I started writing music when I was about 15, and since then I had always wanted to write something for orchestra. The kind of music that I wanted to write was something like progressive rock on orchestral instruments. A driving rhythm, fun, accessible, catchy melody, beautiful harmony, and above all, good old-fashioned, safe, friendly tonality. The sorts of things that people might like to listen to, something commercially viable. My musical tastes and interests had changed a lot, and so I ended up writing a piece for orchestra that is almost the complete antithesis of all of those things. Very different. No driving rhythm. Instead, the sense of pulse in the music is sporadic. There is a melody, which recurs, but it's not exactly catchy. I wouldn't describe the harmonies as beautiful. Unnerving, perhaps. It's slow-paced, staid, considered. It has quite a distinct ambience, a sense of creeping dread. The title of the piece, Fashionable Disease, comes from a deliberate misquotation of the lyric of a song. The original lyric was, "Is it fashion or disease?" What exactly the fashionable disease referred to in the title is, I couldn't tell you. It's open to your interpretation. Some of the more notable moments include the string glissando punctuated with pizzicato. That's an idea that I lifted from Bartók, his music for strings, percussion and celeste. Stanley Kubrick fans may recognise it from the soundtrack to The Shining. Another moment is this passage of explosive brass tremolando, with the trill between the notes so fast as to be almost imperceptible. It didn't really turn out the way I had hoped it would. Instead, it sounds more like a siren. I now find that I quite like the way it sounds, particularly the way the French horn player very admirably soldiers on through the part. You can hear it's a real strain. Technically difficult, and I like the way that is audible in the playing. The sound of that moment calls to mind for me the image of a box of food, forgotten and abandoned at the back of a cupboard somewhere, and upon opening it, finding it crawling with writhing, reeling maggots. That moment of panic upon confronting decay. I particularly like the way it ends, delicate pizzicato, and the doleful knell of the glockenspiel. On the one hand, so much of what can be said with tonality has already been said. There are only so many chord progressions or melodies that can fit with certain chords. For atonality, there's no end to the harmonic stories you can tell with it. But it must be said that limitations do often foster creativity. Fashionable Disease isn't really an atonal piece. There are standard chords, recognisably from the classical or even the jazz vocabulary, half-diminished chords and so on. I find this sort of hybrid tonality most interesting, unanchored, but with the occasional hint of something familiar to help guide your ear, or perhaps music that is mostly tonal, with the occasional atonal aside, deliberately dissonant, to keep the ear interested. And by the end, you're left scratching your head wondering, what was that all about? What did it mean? It sounded serious. The audience for atonal music is just so much smaller than for tonal music. But if you just spend a bit of time immersing yourself in it, eventually you'll hear it in a different light. Certain dissonances, minor seconds, major sevenths become familiar, difficult and abrasive, like old friends. I'm sure the same is true of microtonality, the more you get to know it. For a certain sort of composer, having your work performed by an orchestra really is the holy grail, not least because an orchestra's time is very expensive, and orchestras are often quite selective about the music that they play. because of course they need to sell tickets, but also because it has a certain prestige about it, both in the sense of it having that Hollywood sheen, you hear it all the time in films, Hollywood movies, but also that all the great classical composers to whose heights we aspire wrote symphonies and tone poems and all sorts for orchestra. And the skill of getting the most out of that set of instruments can take a very long time to perfect, and it's a chance for a composer to prove their mettle. Metal! Quite often in concerts, pieces of new music get programmed alongside better known works. The contemporary piece is put there as a bit of a token, and it's usually relatively short. My piece, Fashionable Disease, is also quite short, less than 5 minutes, I think. It would be perfect to be played by your orchestra. Why don't you get in touch with me and I'll give you the score? If your orchestra is looking for something weird to play, why not play my piece? What I'm trying to do with the archive is get together a series of short programs of my music, kind of like little EPs, usually with the eponymous work somewhere in the middle. So this time I've bookended Fashionable Disease with 2 short pieces. The first of these is a piece for guitars and recorders. It's called An Upward Trajectory, the first bookend of this musical triptych. It has a graphic score, and it was performed in November 2015 at Dulwich Picture Gallery in South London. It's just under 2 minutes long. There's really only one idea in it, and that's ascension. Start at a low pitch and gradually ascend. It has a certain light-heartedness, a levity about it. Something I was really pleased that the recorder player did was that she started out on the bass recorder, and about halfway through she switched over to a regular treble recorder, which contributes to this overall sense of the pitch ascending. It's something like an acoustic rendering of a shepherd tone, which those of you who are interested in your analog synthesizers will know is a set of sine waves that trick the ear into sounding as if they are perpetually moving upwards in pitch. The third piece in the set, the final bookend, is another short piece, only about a minute long. It was written as the soundtrack for a short animation by a student. I don't know if the animation ever got finished. I was working to a very sketchy cut. I'm not sure if the animation had a title, so I've taken the liberty of giving the music the title The Sense of Being Stared At. It's a little nod to Rupert Sheldrake and his research. I decided the best way of going about it was to create atmosphere. Very piercing high notes played on a harmonica, which I then manipulated. Truth be told, I don't fully remember how I made a lot of the sounds that you hear in this recording. Yep, that's probably enough for now. Let's start the music.